Hello family, welcome to Stories with Storytime. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also, so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you. As you do so, sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Julia sat by the large bay window of her elegantly furnished apartment, sipping her morning coffee as the city hummed below her. 3 years ago. Mornings like these felt impossibly far. She had been shattered, her heart broken into pieces by the man she once called her husband. Marcus had been her world, and when he left her for Candace, it felt as if the very ground beneath her had crumbled. The humiliation of the public divorce, the pitying looks from friends, and the cruel whispers of betrayal had almost destroyed her. Almost. But today, Julia was no longer the woman Marcus left behind. She had rebuilt herself, not just emotionally, but financially. She had carved a new path, one that led her to something far greater than the pain he had inflicted. Motherhood. But that path hadn't come without its shadows. In the beginning, Julia had pushed people away. Friends who checked in were met with silence. Neighbors offering kindness were met with a polite but firm distance. It wasn't pride, it was survival. She no longer trusted anyone with her pain. Isolation became her armor. A soft giggle echoed from behind her, followed by the quick patter of little feet. "Mommy." 2 small figures rushed toward her, their identical faces lighting up with joy. Julia knelt, opening her arms wide as her twins, Mason and Mila, ran into her embrace. At 3 years old, they were the light of her life, her greatest secret and her most profound victory. No one, not even Marcus, knew they existed. She had made sure of that. She had raised them in love, protecting them from the ghosts of her past. As she held them close, she knew one undeniable truth. Marcus thought he had won when he left her, but she had already won the moment she chose to live for her children. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks as he admired his reflection in the mirror. 36 years old, successful, wealthy, and soon to be a father. He had everything a man could ask for. Leaving Julia had been the best decision of his life, or so he told himself. He convinced himself that she had been a burden, always wanting more from him, always clinging too tightly. With Candace, things were different. She understood the power of status, of wealth. She was beautiful, ambitious, and, most importantly, she wasn't Julia. He smirked at the thought of his ex-wife. She must be miserable now, alone, forgotten. Candace's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Marcus, we should go." She stood in the doorway of their grand penthouse, her hand resting on her barely noticeable baby bump. Marcus beamed with pride. This was exactly how he had envisioned his life. A stunning wife, a child on the way, and an empire that was only growing. "I can't wait to see Julia's face," Candace mused with a sly grin. "I hope she's still wearing that pathetic look of heartbreak," Marcus chuckled. "Oh, she will be. Women like her never move on." As they left their home, Marcus couldn't shake the satisfaction he felt. He was convinced. Julia had spent the last 3 years drowning in regret, still longing for the life he had taken from her. He had no idea just how wrong he was. 3 years ago, Julia had stood in the ruins of her marriage, gasping for air. As the divorce papers lay before her, Marcus had made his choice. He had chosen Candace. The betrayal had been swift, public, and merciless. The man she had loved for years had discarded her like she meant nothing. The nights that followed were the hardest. She had cried herself to sleep, replaying every moment of their life together, wondering where she had gone wrong. But the pain of losing him paled in comparison to what she lost next, their unborn child. Stress and grief had taken their toll, leading to a miscarriage that left her feeling hollow. But Julia wasn't a woman who stayed broken for long. In her darkest moment, she made a decision. She would be a mother, with or without Marcus. Using the last remnants of their marriage, she accessed their stored embryos from the fertility clinic. It was a decision she made alone, without hesitation. Marcus had abandoned her, but she would give life to the children he never knew existed. 9 months later, she held Mason and Mila in her arms, and for the first time since the divorce, she felt whole again. She had lost Marcus, but in the process, she had found something far more precious, her reason to fight. The transition from heartbreak to healing had been anything but easy. Julia had spent nights nursing her twins, tears streaming down her face as she whispered to them about the world she would give them. She had no one, no family, no husband, no safety net. Marcus had taken everything when he left. And yet, when someone offered help, Julia said no. Whether it was the neighbor with warm meals or the friend who texted just to check in, she brushed them all aside. Pride told her she could handle it. Pain told her she had to. She wore independence like armor, even when it left her aching in silence. But Julia wasn't one to surrender. She dusted herself off and built a career, launching her own interior design business that flourished beyond her imagination. Slowly, she turned her pain into power. She became a woman who no longer needed Marcus's love, approval, or money. Today, Julia stood on the balcony of her newly acquired home, watching her children play in the garden below. Her heart swelled with pride. She had done this on her own. Marcus had expected her to fall apart, but she had risen higher than ever. She smiled as Mila called out to her, waving a tiny hand. "Mommy, are you happy?" Julia felt the lump in her throat, but this time it wasn't sadness. It was victory. She knelt beside her daughter and whispered, "Happier than I've ever been, my love." And for the first time in years, she truly meant it. Marcus parked his sleek black car outside one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, stepping out with the confidence of a man who owned the world. Tonight was the night. He and Candace had planned this moment perfectly, a grand event where they would flaunt their happiness, their success, their upcoming baby. He was eager to see Julia's reaction when she realized just how much she had lost. Candace linked her arm through his, her eyes gleaming. "Are you ready for the show?" Inside, the restaurant was buzzing with the city's elite. Marcus scanned the room, anticipation thrumming through his veins, and then he saw her. Julia. But something was different. She wasn't the broken woman he had expected. No, she looked radiant, powerful even. And then his eyes drifted down to the two children at her side, two identical toddlers with his eyes. His features, his breath caught in his throat, the world around him blurred. What the hell was he looking at? Candace's grip tightened on his arm as realization dawned on them both. Julia had moved on, and she had done it in a way they never saw coming. Marcus's entire world tilted as he stood frozen, staring at the two children clinging to Julia. Twins. His mind screamed in disbelief. It wasn't possible. He had left Julia 3 years ago, convinced she would never move on, that she would remain trapped in the misery of his absence. And yet here she was, glowing, thriving, and holding two children who looked hauntingly familiar. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he took an involuntary step forward, but Julia barely spared him a glance. She was talking to someone, a well-dressed businessman who leaned in close, whispering something that made her laugh. That laugh. It was light, carefree, nothing like the shattered woman he had walked away from. Candace's nails dug into his arm, her grip tightening. Whose children are those?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, laced with uncertainty. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I don't know." But deep down, a sickening realization clawed at him. He had an idea. Julia finally turned, locking eyes with him, and the air grew thick with unspoken words. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then a slow, knowing smile played on her lips. "Marcus," she said smoothly, her voice carrying no traces of past heartbreak. "Candace." She let her gaze drop to Candace's barely noticeable baby bump, then back to Marcus's face. Her expression was unreadable. He struggled to form words, but nothing came out. His mind was too busy racing, connecting dots that refused to make sense. The twins? Were they his? Julia tilted her head, almost as if she could hear his thoughts. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" Her voice was polite, too detached. Marcus had walked into this evening, expecting to see a broken woman. Instead, he had walked straight into his worst nightmare. Candace's confidence, which had been rock solid just minutes ago, began to crumble. She had envisioned this night 1,000 times. Julia sitting alone, consumed with regret, while she and Marcus basked in the glow of their perfect life. Instead, she was the one feeling small. She gripped Marcus's arm tighter, her gaze darting between him and Julia. The resemblance was too strong. Those twins weren't just any children. They were Marcus's spitting image. Julia had barely acknowledged her, but that single glance had been enough to send an icy chill down her spine. Candace licked her lips, trying to compose herself. "We should sit down," she murmured. But Marcus didn't move. His entire body was rigid, eyes locked on Julia's every movement, every gesture toward the twins. Suddenly, Julia's companion leaned in, whispering something that made her smirk. Marcus's jaw clenched. Who the hell was he? Something about the man's presence set his teeth on edge. Julia turned slightly, catching Marcus's stare, and raised a single brow. She had practiced this moment in her mind more times than she could count, rehearsed every line, every look. It wasn't confidence she wore tonight. It was control, a calm she had trained herself to master. Beneath it all, her pulse quickened, but she refused to let them see anything but poise. Something wrong? She asked, amusement flickering in her eyes. Candace's stomach twisted. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. They were supposed to be the ones in control, yet Julia exuded an effortless power, as if she knew something they didn't. Marcus finally snapped out of his trance, his voice rough with suspicion. Whose kids are they, Julia? A silence fell over the table. Julia's smirk didn't waver. Instead, she took a sip of her wine, her eyes locked onto Marcus's with chilling confidence. Why do you care? She asked softly, but the way she said it, the way she looked at him, it wasn't a question, it was a warning. Marcus couldn't shake the suffocating feeling closing in on him. Why do you care? Julia's words repeated in his head like a taunt. Why did he care? Because those children had his eyes, his features, his damn DNA. He could feel it in his bones. His hand curled into a fist on the table as he watched Julia laugh with the man beside her, completely at ease. The sight infuriated him. He had spent the last 3 years believing she was drowning in sorrow, and now she was looking at him like he was the ghost of a past she had already buried. The worst part, she wasn't denying anything. She wasn't confirming anything either. She was making him suffer. Candace shifted beside him, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for her glass of water. Marcus could feel the tension radiating off her. She was worried. Candace leaned in, her voice low but sharp. Marcus, you need to find out the truth. He didn't need to be told twice. But before he could press Julia for answers, a new presence entered the scene. A tall, dark-skinned man in an expensive suit strode into the restaurant. His sharp gaze landed directly on Candace. The moment she saw him, her entire body stiffened. Marcus didn't miss the way her hand instinctively dropped to her stomach. The man smirked, taking slow, deliberate steps toward them before stopping just beside Julia's table. "Long time no see, Candace," he drawled, his voice dripping with amusement. Marcus turned to Candace, watching in growing confusion as her skin paled. Who the hell was this man, and why did Candace look like she had just seen a ghost? The air turned thick with tension. Marcus could feel it. Something was about to break. Candace's fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of the table, her eyes darting toward the man standing before her. Marcus immediately sensed her unease, his gaze flicking between them. He wasn't stupid. Something was off. The man, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, exuded confidence, his smirk deepening as he slid his hands into his pockets. "You look surprised, Candace," he said smoothly, his tone laced with amusement. "Didn't expect to see me?" Candace's throat bobbed as she struggled for words. Julia, still seated, tilted her wineglass slightly, watching the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. Marcus's patience snapped. "Who the hell is this?" His voice was sharp, demanding answers. The man didn't flinch. Instead, his eyes darkened with something unreadable as he turned to Marcus. "Ethan," he introduced himself, extending a hand that Marcus didn't take. "Candace and I go way back." His gaze flickered to Candace's barely noticeable bump, and Marcus felt the shift in the air. A sickening realization clawed at his gut. Why was Ethan looking at Candace's stomach like that? Candace finally found her voice, but it was weak, strained. "Marcus, let's just go," she urged, trying to tug at his arm. But Marcus wasn't moving. He could feel it. The foundation of his world was starting to crack, and Julia, seated across from him, knew it too. Her lips curled into a knowing smile, and she leaned forward. "Maybe you should listen to him, Marcus," she said. "You might not like what you're about to hear." Marcus's blood ran cold. His grip on his glass tightened as he turned fully to Candace, whose face had drained of all color. There was only one reason she would react this way. His stomach twisted painfully, but he needed to hear it from her. "Candace," he said slowly, his voice dangerously calm. "Why does he think he has a right to speak about you like this?" Candace shook her head quickly, her eyes pleading. "Marcus, please?" But Ethan wasn't going to let her escape. He let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You didn't tell him? His eyes flicked back to Marcus, and what he said next sent a cold chill through the air. You're celebrating a pregnancy that isn't even yours. The room fell into silence. Marcus's jaw locked, his vision blurring with pure rage. What did you just say? His voice was no longer calm, it was lethal. Candace grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. He's lying, Marcus. Don't listen to him. But she was cut off by Julia's voice, smooth and deliberate. Do you really think that's your baby? The weight of her words crashed over him, suffocating. Candace yanked away from him, stepping back like a trapped animal. Marcus, her voice cracked. It was a mistake. A sharp laugh left Julia's lips. Now you know how it feels. The words slipped out sharper than she expected. Julia held her posture, but for a fleeting second her gaze lowered, not out of pity, but from the sharp echo of a wound never fully closed. She had fought hard to stand tall again, but that didn't mean the past had stopped hurting. That didn't mean she'd forgotten. Marcus felt the ground beneath him vanish. He had left Julia for this woman, and she had betrayed him in the same way he had betrayed Julia. Marcus stormed out of the restaurant, his chest heaving with rage. The world around him blurred as he clenched his fists, trying to process what had just happened. The woman he had risked everything for had played him for a fool. His mind reeled, his stomach turning violently at the thought of Ethan touching Candace. Had she been lying to him this entire time? Had he spent the last 3 years building a future on nothing but deception? Julia's voice echoed in his mind now. Now you know how it feels. The cruelty of it all cut deeper than he wanted to admit. He had been so sure that leaving Julia was the right decision, convinced that Candace was the better choice. And now he had lost everything. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, dialing Julia's number without thinking. It rang, and for a second he allowed himself to hope. But when she answered, her voice was cold, detached. What do you want, Marcus? His throat tightened. He had demanded answers from her earlier, had taunted her with his supposed happiness. Now he was the one drowning in uncertainty. The twins, he finally said, his voice raw. Are they mine? There was silence, and for a moment he thought she had hung up. Then she let out a quiet exhale. You lost the right to ask me anything 3 years ago. The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, his pulse pounding. He had never felt powerless before, but now he knew what it was like to be left with nothing but regret. Candace sat alone in their penthouse, the city lights flickering through the large windows, casting shadows over her trembling frame. Her hands rested protectively over her stomach, her mind racing with thoughts of how everything had unraveled so fast. She had worked tirelessly to build this life with Marcus, ensuring Julia remained a forgotten name in their past. Yet in one night, the walls of her carefully crafted empire had crumbled. Marcus hadn't come home. He hadn't called. And she knew he was out there, digging for the truth. A soft knock at the door sent a wave of dread down her spine. She already knew who it was before she even opened it. Ethan stood on the other side, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. You should have told him before I did. Candace's fingers tightened around the doorknob, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Leave, Ethan, she whispered. But he didn't move. Instead, he leaned in slightly, his voice lower, more dangerous. You made your bed, Candace. Now you get to lie in it. Her eyes burned as tears welled up. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she choked. I love Marcus, Ethan scoffed. Love? He shook his head. Then why were you in my bed while carrying his last name? Candace's knees weakened, and she clutched the doorframe. She had convinced herself that Marcus would never find out, that what had happened with Ethan had been a mistake, an impulse. But now she was faced with the undeniable truth. There was no escaping this. Marcus was going to make her pay. Marcus gripped his glass tightly, his knuckles white as he sat in a dimly lit lounge, swirling the whiskey in his hand. The bitterness of betrayal coated his tongue, heavier than the alcohol burning down his throat. The moment he had left the restaurant, he had gone searching for proof, for confirmation, for anything that would disprove the nightmare unfolding before him. But no matter where he looked, the truth remained the same. Candace had lied. The child she carried wasn't his. His best friend had fathered the baby. She was so eager to flaunt it. The weight of humiliation pressed down on him like an anchor. He had ruined his marriage for a woman who had betrayed him just as effortlessly. His jaw clenched as he reached for his phone. Julia's name hovered on the screen, but he hesitated. How could he even begin to fix what he had destroyed? A familiar voice broke his thoughts. "You look like hell." Marcus turned sharply to find Julia standing a few feet away. Her arms crossed as she observed him. She hadn't sought him out. This was coincidence. Yet it felt like fate, forcing him to face his past. His throat tightened as he took her in, the effortless way she carried herself now, a woman who no longer needed him. "You knew, didn't you?" he asked hoarsely. Julia tilted her head. That Candace was cheating? No, but I knew karma had a way of working itself out. Marcus exhaled heavily, rubbing a hand over his face. "I never meant to hurt you the way I did." Julia gave a soft chuckle, but there was no warmth in it. "That's the thing about betrayal, Marcus. You never mean to destroy someone until you do." Marcus sat motionless as Candace cried in front of him, her mascara smudging as she reached for his hand. "Please, Marcus, I can explain," she sobbed, her grip desperate. He yanked his hand away, his expression cold. "Explain what?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. "That you've been sleeping with my best friend? That you've been lying to me for months?" Candace shook her head violently. "It wasn't like that. I love you, I swear." "I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you." Marcus let out a bitter laugh, standing to his full height. "You weren't scared, Candace. You were selfish." He turned away from her, disgust curling in his stomach. He had left a loyal, loving wife for this. Candace's sobs grew louder, but he didn't care. The damage was done. He had paraded her around, had shamed Julia, humiliated her, made her feel like she wasn't enough, only to be played for a fool himself. His chest tightened as he thought back to the moment. Julia had looked at him, that knowing smirk on her lips as she watched everything fall apart. She had been right. He had given everything up, for nothing. He turned to Candace one last time, his voice void of emotion. "We're done." Her breath hitched. "Marcus, please." But he was already walking away, leaving her behind the same way he had once left Julia. The only difference? Julia had rebuilt herself. Candace, she was about to lose everything. Marcus stormed into his lawyer's office, his mind spinning. He needed answers. The thought of Julia's twins haunted him, their resemblance to him, the way she had refused to answer his questions. There was no denying the connection. He had to know the truth. His lawyer, Mr. Calloway, adjusted his glasses as he flipped through a folder. "Marcus, I looked into this, and you're not gonna like what I found." Marcus clenched his fists, his patience wearing thin. "Just tell me." Mr. Calloway exhaled, his expression grim. "Before your divorce was finalized, Julia underwent IVF. She used your frozen embryos." The words slammed into Marcus like a freight train. "What?" His breath caught in his throat. "You're telling me she had my children, without my knowledge?" Mr. Calloway nodded. "Legally, she did nothing wrong. The embryos were stored while you were married, and she had full right to use them before the divorce was official." Marcus's heart pounded. His children. His blood had been growing up without him, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. He shot to his feet. "I want custody." Mr. Calloway shook his head. "That's not possible. Julia has full legal rights. You abandoned her, Marcus. You left her with nothing, and the court will see her as the sole parent." Marcus's world spun. For years he had thought Julia was the one left behind. Now he realized he was the one truly alone. He had lost Julia, lost his marriage, and now he had lost his own children. And the worst part? Julia had known this all along. Julia stood at her office window, watching the city stretch out before her, a quiet strength in her stance. When Marcus barged in, his face thunderous, she didn't flinch, she simply turned, arms crossed. "I assume you finally got your answers." His jaw clenched. "You used my embryos. You took my children away from me." Julia arched a brow, unbothered. "No, Marcus. You did that when you walked away from our marriage." His eyes darkened, but there was no room for argument. She had the legal upper hand, and she knew it. He took a slow, measured breath. "I deserve to be in their lives." Julia tilted her head. "Deserve?" She let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "Deserve is a funny word coming from you. Did I deserve to be humiliated? To be discarded like I was nothing? To be left to mourn alone?" His face tightened. "Julia, they are my children." She stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "And where were you when I was carrying them? Where were you when I held them for the first time? When they said their first words? You weren't there, Marcus. You don't get to walk in now and claim them." He swallowed hard, realizing the weight of her words. He had been so focused on himself, he had never once considered what she had gone through. Julia exhaled and turned away. "You lost the right to call them yours, the moment you chose someone else over us." Marcus stood there, defeated. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to lose. His scandal spread like wildfire. The whispers followed him everywhere, at work, at the clubs, at business events. His phone rang constantly, investors pulling out, board members demanding explanations. His image was tarnished. The story of his betrayal, Candace's infidelity, and his secret children had reached the media. The same people who once admired him now looked at him with pity or disdain. He stormed into his office, slamming his fists against the desk. "Fix this," he barked at his assistant. But she hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "Sir, there's nothing to fix. Your reputation, it's already ruined." His stomach twisted. He had built his empire on appearances, and now it was crumbling before his eyes. That night, he sat in his empty penthouse, staring at the city that once felt like his kingdom. Now, it felt suffocating. His reflection in the glass mocked him. He had everything, a wife who loved him, a future he took for granted, and now he had nothing. Julia had moved on, thriving in ways he never thought possible. His children were growing up without him, their laughter filling a home he wasn't welcome in. And Candace, she had disappeared, leaving only the wreckage of their failed relationship behind. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. For the first time in his life, he had no one to blame but himself. And the realization crushed him. This was the downfall he never saw coming. Candace sat alone in a rundown motel, her hands cradling her growing belly as the weight of her choices crushed her. She didn't flinch. She simply turned, arms crossed. "I assume you finally got your answers," his jaw clenched. "You used my embryos. You took my children away from me." Julia arched a brow, unbothered. "No, Marcus. You did that when you walked away from our marriage." His eyes darkened, but there was no room for argument. She had the legal upper hand, and she knew it. He took a slow, measured breath. "I deserve to be in their lives." Julia tilted her head. "Deserve?" She let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "Deserve is a funny word coming from you. Did I deserve to be humiliated? To be discarded like I was nothing? To be left to mourn alone?" His face tightened. "Julia, they are my children." She stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "And where were you when I was carrying them? Where were you when I held them for the first time? When they said their first words? You weren't there, Marcus. You don't get to walk in now and claim them." He swallowed hard, realizing the weight of her words. He had been so focused on himself, he had never once considered what she had gone through. Julia exhaled and turned away. The words had come out clean, sharp. But inside, they left a sting. She had stood alone through every milestone. No one to share the joy, no one to shoulder the fear. There were nights she'd cried quietly after putting them to bed, wishing just for a moment of shared comfort. She had built a life, yes, but not without ache. "You lost the right to call them yours the moment you chose someone else over us." Marcus stood there, defeated. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to lose. His scandal spread like wildfire. The whispers followed him everywhere, at work, at the clubs, at business events. His phone rang constantly, investors pulling out, board members demanding explanations. His image was tarnished. The story of his betrayal, Candace's infidelity, and his secret children had reached the media. The same people who once admired him now looked at him with pity or disdain. He stormed into his office, slamming his fists against the desk. "Fix this." He barked at his assistant, but she hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "Sir, there's nothing to fix. Your reputation, it's already ruined." His stomach twisted. He had built his empire on appearances, and now it was crumbling before his eyes. That night, he sat in his empty penthouse, staring at the city that once felt like his kingdom. Now it felt suffocating. His reflection in the glass mocked him. He had everything, a wife who loved him, a future he took for granted. And now, he had nothing. Julia had moved on, thriving in ways he never thought possible. His children were growing up without him, their laughter filling a home he wasn't welcome in. And Candace, she had disappeared, leaving only the wreckage of their failed relationship behind. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. For the first time in his life, he had no one to blame but himself, and the realization crushed him. This was the downfall he never saw coming. Candace sat alone in a rundown motel, her hands cradling her growing belly as the weight of her choices crushed her. "You weren't there?" Marcus inhaled sharply, but he had no argument. He had lost his right to be in their lives, and Julia wasn't about to let him waltz back in out of guilt. He took a shaky step back, nodding slowly. "You really won't give me a chance?" The ache in his voice was real, but Julia had made her choice long ago. "Goodbye, Marcus." She stepped back inside, shutting the door behind her, sealing the past where it belonged. As Marcus stood alone on the doorstep, the weight of his actions fully sank in. He had lost Julia, he had lost his family, and now he had to live with it. The sound of laughter filled Julia's home as her twins ran through the living room, their small feet pattering against the wooden floor. She watched them, warmth spreading through her chest. This was her happiness. She had spent years fighting, rebuilding, and healing, and now she could finally say she had found peace. Marcus was nothing more than a distant memory, a lesson she had survived. She had spent too much of her life waiting for a man who had never truly valued her. But those days were over. Now she was living for herself and for her children. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. When she opened it, she was met with a familiar, comforting presence. Alexander. He smiled, his gaze warm. "Ready to go?" Julia exhaled, a small smile tugging at her lips. More than ever. As she stepped outside, hand in hand with the man who had always respected her, she felt a sense of finality settle over her. She had chosen herself. She had chosen to walk away from a love that had only broken her, and embrace the love that lifted her higher. Meanwhile, somewhere across the city, Marcus sat alone in his once grand penthouse, staring at the empty space where his future should have been. He had won the battle years ago when he left Julia, but in the end, Julia had won the war. As the door to her past fully closed behind her, Julia walked toward a future that finally, truly belonged to her. The chapter with Marcus was over, and she had never felt so free. Candace sat on the edge of the worn-out motel bed, staring blankly at the cracked wallpaper, as reality pressed down on her like an unbearable weight. Her designer clothes, once symbols of her victory over Julia, now felt like a mockery of the woman she used to be. The few people who had once welcomed her at society events now ignored her calls. She had become a pariah, a walking scandal. The pregnancy that was once her weapon against Julia had turned into her greatest burden. She had never planned for this. To be abandoned, to be without a man to anchor her status, to be utterly alone. Her mind raced with thoughts of what could have been if she had just stayed in her place, instead of trying to take what belonged to another woman. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. How had she gone from being Marcus's trophy to a discarded, forgotten woman carrying the child of a man who refused to claim it? Desperation clawed at her as she picked up her phone, scrolling through her dwindling list of contacts. There had to be someone, anyone, who could help her. But one by one, the messages she sent were met with silence. Her last hope rested in Julia. Swallowing her pride, she dialed the number she had once smirked at, the number of the woman she had stolen from. The phone rang, and when it finally connected, Candace's breath hitched. "Julia, please, I need help." A long pause stretched between them before Julia's voice, calm and unwavering, filled the silence. The silence. "You took everything from me, Candace, and now you want my kindness?" Candace's lip trembled. "I have nowhere to go." Another pause. "That's not my problem." The call ended, leaving Candace staring at the screen in shock. For the first time in her life, she truly understood what it meant to have nothing. Marcus sat in the dimly lit corner of an upscale bar, the ice in his untouched whiskey melting as he stared blankly ahead. His life had become a blur of silent suffering. No amount of wealth or power could fix the gaping hole left in his life. His phone, once buzzing with business calls and dinner invitations, was now eerily silent. The world he had built had turned its back on him. He was no longer the man people admired. He was the man people whispered about in scandalous undertones. His once loyal associates distanced themselves, afraid of being associated with his downfall. The company he had fought to expand was now barely holding on, shareholders losing confidence in him, as both a businessman and a man. He had thought Candace's betrayal was the worst thing to happen to him. But losing Julia had been the real loss. A familiar voice broke through the haze. "You look like hell." Marcus turned, his breath catching for a brief moment. Julia stood before him, her expression unreadable, arms crossed. She was no longer the woman he could manipulate. He tried to muster a smirk, the same arrogance that had once made her weak, but it fell flat. "Did you come here to gloat?" Julia tilted her head. "I don't need to, Marcus. You did this to yourself." His fingers curled around his glass. "I miss them," he admitted, his voice quieter than he intended. "Marcus, that's the difference between us. I missed you too, once, but then I healed." And that healing hadn't come overnight. There were nights she cried in the dark, wondering what was wrong with her. There were mornings she faced alone, building a life one piece at a time while pretending the silence didn't hurt. But she had learned that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing herself, despite the pain. "You're still looking for something you threw away." She turned to leave, and Marcus felt something inside him crack. She wasn't coming back. He had lost her, forever. Sunlight streamed through the cafe windows as Julia sipped her tea, the warmth of the moment settling deep in her bones. For the first time in years, she felt weightless. She no longer lived in the shadow of her past, no longer carried the burden of Marcus's betrayal. She had rebuilt her life from the ashes he had left her in. And now, she was free. Across from her, Alexander studied her with quiet admiration. He had been patient, allowing her time to heal, never pressuring her into something she wasn't ready for. But now, as she looked into his eyes, she realized she was ready. A slow smile curved her lips. "Thank you for waiting." Alexander's brow lifted. "Waiting for what?" She set her cup down, her heart calm. "For me to see what's right in front of me." His fingers brushed against hers, a touch that felt like a promise. "I would have waited forever." The sincerity in his voice made something deep inside her soften. Julia had spent years believing love had to be fought for, that it had to be painful to be real. But this was easy. Safe. It was everything Marcus had never given her. She took a deep breath, allowing herself to embrace what she had always deserved, happiness. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus sat in his empty apartment staring at his phone. Julia's number highlighted on the screen. He wanted to call, to say something. Anything. But he didn't. He knew the truth. Julia was no longer looking back. Her future was unfolding without him. And for the first time in his life, Marcus finally understood what regret truly felt like. Marcus parked outside Julia's home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned white. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Words swirled in his head, apologies he should have made years ago, confessions that had once felt impossible to say. He had spent weeks in torment, replaying every mistake, every cruel decision that had led him here. He had lost his marriage, his reputation, his unborn child, but it was the loss of his twins, the ones he never even knew about, that haunted him most. He needed to see them, to make things right, even if he had no right to ask for anything. Exhaling sharply, he stepped out of the car and approached the front door, his pulse hammering in his ears. When the door finally opened, Julia stood there, her expression unreadable. She had been expecting him. Before he could speak, she crossed her arms, her voice calm yet firm. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" He swallowed hard. "I just want a moment with them." Julia didn't move, her gaze assessing him, as if weighing whether he deserved the privilege. "They don't know you." The words sliced through him, but he nodded. "I know, but I want to change that." A bitter smile ghosted her lips. "You don't get to walk in and rewrite the past. You chose Candace. You chose to leave." His chest tightened, and it was the worst mistake of my life. A flicker of something, sadness maybe, passed over her face, but she quickly masked it. "Some mistakes can't be undone, Marcus." She hesitated before delivering the final blow. "And some second chances don't belong to you." She shut the door, leaving him on the outside where he had put himself long ago. Candace sat in the cold, sterile hospital room, her fingers trembling against the rough fabric of the hospital gown. Her body was weak, exhausted from labor, but the emptiness in her heart was far worse. The baby had come early, and there had been no one to hold her hand through the pain. No Marcus. No Ethan. She had spent months believing that, even if she lost everything, at least she would have her child. But as she stared at the tiny infant sleeping in the crib beside her, reality struck her like a cruel final blow. She had no idea how to be a mother. Tears blurred her vision as she reached for her phone with shaking hands. There was only one person left to call. She pressed the contact and waited, her heart pounding in her chest. "Marcus," she whispered when he finally answered. "I had the baby." Silence stretched between them, then his voice came, emotionless. "Congratulations." Candace flinched. "Please, I need help. I can't do this alone." She heard a sharp exhale on the other end. "And you think I can, after what you did?" Her grip tightened on the phone. "I made mistakes, Marcus, but so did you." A bitter chuckle followed. "And yet only one of us is paying for them." Her breath hitched. "Please, just come see her." Another pause. "I'm sorry, Candace, but I'm done saving you." The call ended. The weight of his rejection crushed her, the truth unbearable. She had gambled everything, and lost. The baby stirred beside her, unaware of the mess her mother had made of her life. And for the first time, Candace realized this was all she had left. Julia sat on the balcony, a cool breeze sweeping through the air. The sound of laughter echoed from inside. Her twins were playing, their giggles pure, untouched by the pain that had once consumed her life. She had spent so long trying to prove she was stronger than the betrayal, stronger than the heartbreak. But tonight, as she watched the stars blink against the dark sky, she understood something she never had before. Happiness wasn't just about overcoming the past. It was about choosing the future. The sliding door opened behind her, and warm arms wrapped around her waist. "Alexander." He rested his chin on her shoulder, his voice low. "You're thinking again," she smiled, leaning into him. "Always." He turned her to face him, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Let me ask you something." His expression was serious, yet soft. "Are you happy, Julia? Not just surviving, not just healing, but truly happy?" She stared at him, the man who had stood by her side, never demanding, always patient. She thought of the woman she used to be, the one who had begged for Marcus's love, the one who had been crushed beneath his indifference. And then she thought of the woman she had become, the one who had rebuilt her life on her own terms. A slow, genuine smile spread across her lips. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steady. "For the first time in a long time, I am." Alexander kissed her forehead, and as the warmth of his love wrapped around her, she knew this was the life she was always meant to have. Marcus was her past, but Alexander, he was her future. Marcus sat in his once pristine penthouse, now a mere shell of what it used to be. The furniture, once meticulously arranged, was in disarray. Half-filled whiskey glasses cluttered the table and unopened letters stacked up on the counter. This was his reality, empty, quiet, suffocating. He had lost his business connections. His influence in the industry was crumbling. The respect he once commanded had vanished, but none of that compared to the deeper loss, the one that clawed at his soul every time he closed his eyes. Julia. The twins. The life he had walked away from. He had spent years convincing himself he was the one who had won, that Julia would always be stuck longing for him. But the truth had come crashing down. She had never needed him. She had risen without him, built something stronger, something that he could never touch again. His fingers hovered over his phone. Julia's number still memorized, despite the fact that he hadn't called in years. What would he even say? That he was sorry? That he regretted everything? That he would give up everything just to go back and choose her? The words felt empty now, meaningless. A knock at the door startled him. For a fleeting second, a ridiculous hope flickered. Julia. But as he opened it, the face on the other side was unfamiliar. A courier handed him an envelope and walked away without a word. Marcus shut the door, tearing it open. His breath caught in his throat as he read the first few lines. Legal notification. Parental rights termination. Julia was making it official. He would never have any claim to the twins, now or in the future. His heart pounded. His hands shook as he reread the words, as if doing so would change their meaning. She was severing the last thread that tied them together. The finality of it hit him like a blow. He sank onto the couch, his chest constricting as an unbearable truth settled over him. He had spent so long thinking Julia would always be a part of his life in some way. But she was gone. And this time, there was no undoing it. Julia sat on the floor of the nursery, watching her twins play, their laughter filling the room. They were the greatest things she had ever done, her most precious victory. She had raised them in love, given them a home filled with warmth, ensured they would never know the pain she had once endured. They didn't need to know about Marcus's absence. She had never spoken ill of him to them, never allowed bitterness to stain their innocence, but she had also never lied. When they had started asking about their father, she had given them the truth, that he had chosen another path, and that their family, though different, was whole. She would not let his mistakes define their future. She would not let his absence feel like a wound. They were loved, and that was enough. Mila toddled over to her, resting her tiny hand on Julia's cheek. "Mommy, are you happy?" Julia's throat tightened, emotions swelling in her chest. "I am, baby." Mason, his dark curls bouncing as he ran, plopped into her lap. Giggling, "Love you, Mommy." Tears stung Julia's eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from overwhelming gratitude. "I love you both more than anything in the world." They had been born from heartbreak, from betrayal, but they had become her greatest joy. She tucked them both into her arms, holding them close. They would grow up knowing they were wanted. They would never beg for love from someone incapable of giving it. And in that moment, Julia knew. She had made the right choice in keeping Marcus out of their lives. They didn't need him. They never had. Candace wandered through unfamiliar streets, her newborn daughter cradled in her arms. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The woman who had once walked into restaurants with her head held high, parading her victories for the world to see, was now invisible. No designer clothes, no lavish home, no adoring whispers behind her back. Just a mother with an infant who had no father, no future mapped out for her. Ethan had blocked her calls, making it clear he wanted nothing to do with either of them. Marcus had severed all ties, ensuring she could never return to the life she had once stolen. She had burned every bridge, and now she was drowning. She passed by a cafe window, her reflection catching her off guard. She looked nothing like the woman she had once been. Hollow cheeks, tired eyes, the weight of her choices pressing into her bones. Inside she saw Julia seated with a man, Alexander. They were laughing, the kind of laughter that came from true happiness, the kind Candace had never known. Her stomach churned with something bitter, jealousy, regret, maybe both. She had once believed she had won by taking Marcus from Julia, but now it was painfully clear. Julia had always been the one who won. Candace clutched her baby closer and turned away. There was no one left to envy, no one left to blame, only herself. Julia stood on the balcony of her home, watching the horizon as the sun dipped below the skyline. She had fought for this peace. She had earned it. Alexander stepped behind her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Ready to go in?" She turned to him, studying the man who had shown her what love should feel like. Safe, steady, unshaken by the past. She laced her fingers with his. "I am." Inside, their children, her twins, his niece and nephew, played together. Their laughter blended into something beautiful. A family built not by blood, but by choice. Meanwhile, miles away, Marcus sat in the darkness of his penthouse, staring at an old photo of Julia. She had truly moved on. The papers in his hand confirmed what his heart had already known. There was no place for him in her life anymore. His phone sat silent beside him. No calls, no messages, no second chances. He had left Julia once, believing he was trading up. But now, as he sat alone in the empire he had built, he understood. Julia had been the real prize all along, and he had let her slip through his fingers. She had won. Not out of revenge, not out of spite, but by choosing herself. And for the first time in his life, Marcus finally understood what it meant to lose, because the woman he had taken for granted was gone, and she was never coming back. Here's the Bible verse for the story. Proverbs 11:3. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. This verse perfectly reflects the essence of the story. Julia remained steadfast, choosing integrity, strength, and self-respect, even when she was abandoned. In contrast, Marcus and Candace, who built their happiness on betrayal and deception, ultimately destroyed themselves. Their downfall wasn't caused by external forces, but by their own choices. In the end, those who act with integrity will always triumph over those who choose deceit. Moral of the story: the choices we make today determine the life we live tomorrow. This story teaches us that betrayal, greed, and selfishness always carry consequences. Marcus thought he could discard Julia and build a better life, only to realize too late that he had thrown away something irreplaceable. Candace believed she could manipulate her way into power, but she ended up with nothing. Meanwhile, Julia, though broken at first, chose to heal, rebuild, and move forward. Ultimately, she found true happiness. Lesson: never take good people for granted. The person you mistreat today might be the one you need tomorrow. Choose integrity over deceit, self-respect over desperation, and healing over revenge. Because in the end, true victory belongs to those who walk away from the past and embrace a future of their own making. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments section, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notifications so you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video with someone who might be inspired. Thank you so much for watching.